Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel and video game news. Let's hop in. Today is Wednesday, October 5th. So, for the accountability section, I finished, much probably to my own surprise and everyone else's, I finished Zero Time Dilemma, which, compare the amount of time I spent on the first nonary game, 999, and Virtue's Last Reward, its sequel to Zero Time Dilemma, it was incredibly less time spent on that game. And the reason for that, clearly, is that about halfway through the game, they run out of interactive gameplay elements in Zero Time Dilemma. It becomes a visual novel in about the worst way you could present a visual novel as far as interaction is concerned, because you literally are going through entire hour long, hour and 20 minute long, hour and 30 minute long cutscenes. Now in Zero Time Dilemma, the cutscenes are voice acted, so it definitely felt like I was watching a very poorly animated anime instead of playing a video game. But as a video game critic, trying to make video game criticism and footage, it puts you in a very weird position where all of a sudden in the back half of that game, I really was more acting like an anime critic, just trying to have that fair use commentary on top of hour and a half long cutscenes, with there just being maybe one interaction in that entire hour long process, and that one interaction was inevitably either asking you to type in a code or make a B decision as far as do you go left or do you go right, and that's it. Whereas if you compare that to like a dating sim visual novel, which may feel weird comparing Zero Time Dilemma, which is this weird ADHD sci-fi storyline, to a romance dating novel, but it's basically the same bones of the concept. And when you do compare it to like a dating visual novel as I would see it, you would probably have an entire schedule where morning, afternoon, and evening have different branches and paths as far as who you're going to go hang out with or what location you're going to go to. You're going to at some point pick one of maybe a dozen different potential suitors or female love interests or male love interests, and that's going to put you on different paths. And it's going to be so complicated that you're going to need a graph, you're going to need a walkthrough to get the true ending for any of the characters. That's not what Zero Time Dilemma really is, though. At all. It has in no way that level of complication to it. And the true path really is going through all the paths. Whereas I feel like if the true path for every dating sim visual novel game was that you had to go through every single path, nowadays that really wouldn't work. And arguably, I don't know if I can't really name the last time that there actually was a true dating sim visual novel game that was even made or released. Nowadays, it tends to keep it a little bit more tight and logical, where maybe there's 2 or 3 female love interests, but really only one that you'd actually want to date, and there usually is some level of sci-fi or some other twist to it, fantasy something around a narrative, and that becomes the bigger hook. The hook in Zero Time Dilemma is basically the same hook as the other nonary games, in that you are jumping through different timelines, and there isn't a big difference from that. There's really just an optimization a little bit, because this third game has voice acting, but at the cost of it still having really ugly 3D models instead of just having flat 2D images. It clearly was a Nintendo DS game, or maybe a 3DS game, but I think really a DS game. And it's severely limited because of that as far as what it could present in 3D, so they really should have just done 2D. I question whether the voice acting itself was even in the original game or whether there was some kind of PC edition there, but I imagine the voice acting probably was in the DS game, and that took up all of their memory space, and that's why there really isn't a game there. And at a certain point, and you don't get to have this conversation probably as much as you should, but also it's kind of nice you don't have to make this argument very much. There's a difference between a piece of art lying to the audience and just completely deceiving the audience, and then delightfully deceiving an audience on an aspect and then revealing it while giving some hints that that might be the case. The perfect example to use is The Sixth Sense. Everybody should know the spoiler for The Sixth Sense, that the Bruce Lee, the main character, was dead the whole time. And throughout the movie, on a second watching, you see that there are several hints to that case. Well, in Zero Time Dilemma, not to spoil too much, but honestly it's not really spoiling anything because there's no way you would have possibly guessed this. There literally is an extra character in, I would say, at least a third of all the scenes in which the camera simply never pans over and shows that character, and that character is not mentioned. He is roughly mentioned, this character, once, and they flash back to that one time that he is mentioned in the same, and the way it's mentioned, it definitely feels more like it could have just been a throwaway analogy of something that somebody was just thinking, not that there actually was a person in the room that there was being mentioned at that time. So when you get very late in the game, because you could only have this revelation fairly late in the game, when you get the revelation that this person has just been in the game this whole time, you totally feel like the game has just lied to you. It hasn't delightfully deceived me or anything like that. They have just straight up lied to me the whole time. And it gets even worse when you look at like the banner on Steam in the library for Zero Time Dilemma, and it has all the characters except for this extra character shown, which is deceptive. And the thumbnail for Zero Time Dilemma must have been just some advertisements, because it straight up has a different character that never even shows up in the game. In fact, that the logo and the thumbnail for Zero Time Dilemma is incredibly deceptive in the first place, because it definitely tries to make it feel like you're going to be in these like Saw death traps, when really throughout the entirety of the game there really aren't any Saw death traps at all. The concept of having to sacrifice a pound of flesh to save yourself is never touched upon, first of all, but there's only like one sequence where anybody is like chained or trapped in a chair with a gun pointing at their head, and they make a big effort on that, whereas pretty much every other time that somebody is killed, it's in a much more normal way. Press a button and the bomb might explode, or the room is filling with gas, find a gas mask, things like that that just don't feel like that first Saw movie at all. I can't help but feel like, to a certain level, I don't believe the creator of the non-Ring games is a good writer. I think he is probably, and I'm just going to assume he's probably this Japanese guy that doesn't have enough time, doesn't have enough skill, and is heavily just kind of leaning on tropes and things he's experienced in his youth, because it's set in the future, and yet he's talking about the first Matrix movie, and he's talking about like giant robot anime, which giant robot anime would be like in the 70s, really, more than even the 80s or 90s as far as anime, maybe early 80s. His idea of romance is very poor in the way he writes it, and his level of extremes is kind of insane, the way things are written. And yeah, if you'd played the previous Nonary games, I guess you should have expected a similar story, because they were also, in the same way, very crazy and just ridiculous. Yeah, I seriously doubt I win here. But yeah. Even if I were to try to spoil all of Zero Time Dilemma's narrative, it would just come out as the ranting of a crazy person more than as a logical description of what is going on and why. If you were to try and do like an anime tag type thing around the Nonary game series, the number of tags would be ridiculously high as far as like psychic abilities, futurism, sci-fi, cults, disease, dystopian, apocalypse, robots, time travel, aliens, alien technology, yeah, that's just the ones I can think off the top of my head as far as different directions things go. And a certain level, if you were going to embrace that kind of level of craziness, I almost want something like a American McGee's Alice type game where you just know the character is crazy and the surrealness of each level or each world makes more sense. So yeah, I finished that, and then I kind of pondered what I wanted to play next. At a certain level, I think I want to play No More Heroes, but at a certain level, I also wonder if now isn't the right time to just play Resident Evil 4. I think the Resident Evil 4 with the remastered mod, I think that makes a decent amount of sense, even though I didn't actually start on that, because by the time I get around to playing Resident Evil 4, if I just keep putting it off, they're going to have that remastered Resident Evil 4, and by the time I schedule Resident Evil 4 with the remastered mod, they may actually have the remastered, remade Resident Evil 4. So, yeah. I'm fairly certain I won't run into micro-stuttering, I hope. I'm fairly certain everything won't work. It will be a little bit unique that I'll be playing a mod, but that's about it. I also need to schedule videos. I also need to still get back to working on my Raspberry Pi Wi-Fi guest router. I also need to still play Zelda Breath of the Wild. So there's several other projects the Amazon Prime sale will probably distract me somewhat. Speaking of distractions, oh, it's my turn, so I need to end. The new Shift Up game, Project Nike, has now 2.5 million pre-registrations on their game. I don't know what the real deal about pre-registering for a mobile game that's going to be free to play is, but I guess that maybe helps keep the first wave of people who would play a game that's supposed to be a long-running gacha type game all in line, so everybody knows when the game launches on day one and plays the dailies from day one. Because yeah, at a certain level, whoever plays the dailies and just does free to play only, but plays every single daily and never misses a day, will be the #1 person in the ranks as far as the free to play people, which will actually make him probably the number 1000th person, but still farther ahead than anybody who misses a day. Another thing that was weird, certainly around the recording of Zero Time Dilemma, as I wrap up on that, is that the fact that these were like 90-minute segments, where they didn't do the greatest of jobs, but they did a much better job than previous games of kind of keeping memory fragments and sections separate and obviously separate. There was definitely a lot of problems in their interface because there was effectively 2 menus a lot of times between which one you were supposed to pick to move the story forward. But in a lot of cases they kept it to 90-minute segments, which very possibly was too long for me, because with all the conversation I was having, I was drinking a ton of water, and so I would say at least a third of every episode that I've recorded for Zero Time Dilemma, I paused the recording at some point and went to the bathroom. I'm fairly certain in one recording I paused the recording twice and went to the bathroom, just because of all the water I was doing and all the peeing I was doing. Is ridiculous. Some of that definitely, I think, has to do with my new recliner chair. Relatively new. I've had it probably for a year now. But also the recliner chair really works, whereas the chair I had before was totally destroying my back. Sniper Ranger says, "Oh, the tax dragon, you almost went bankrupt." Hello, by the way. Hello, Sniper Ranger. I guess that's the deck I'm playing against. Which, yeah. I don't really know how to play this deck, this Flowander deck, against that, if there is a strategy with Flowander against it. Yep. The inconsistency, though, with Zero Time Dilemma still was fairly well noticed. There were definitely times where I was making episodes that were 15 minutes, and there were times when I was making episodes that were an hour and 50 minutes, and that's way too inconsistent, really. Way too inconsistent. At least in the case of, like, playing something like, The Binding of Isaac. The thing I'd say with The Binding of Isaac is that you have this end game in focus. So unless you have a particularly bad experience in one run, and then have a particularly bad run again, and then have a particularly bad run a third time, you'll almost always get fairly consistent links of Binding of Isaac episodes, or at the very least you'll get you'll get a full experience, even if the time is off, because you'd play a full run in Binding of Isaac. Because when I was recording the Binding of Isaac episodes last, I would do maybe a challenge run, or maybe have a short run, and if I died halfway through the short run, or where it was really less than 20 minutes, I would then play another run, and that would get towards that 40-minute or hour-long experience. Let's see if that was the right way. Sniper Ranger says, I was supposed to use the statue that's against the Tax Dragon deck before. And by statue, I guess that's the effect monster that doesn't let you summon anything other than wind monsters. Which, you know, that doesn't really come to the... It doesn't come into my hands very often. Unless that's the statue they're talking about. You're still getting a decent number of surrenders, and we're still making forward progress. They do have this weird warning now, though, which doesn't really make a lot of sense to have this warning when we actually are currently in an event. Alright, well, do we have anything else to talk about as far as catch-up or accountability section, or can we just talk about the video game news and move forward? It is Wednesday, and ideally you'd want to finish a game on Friday and take the weekend off. I've never really had any kind of consistency around that, though, so I wouldn't be surprised if I kind of take it easy over the course of today and maybe tomorrow, and don't actually start a new game. Maybe try to just schedule some videos instead. Alright. Let's activate this and see if that helps us. I did watch Jesse Cox on YouTube show 30 minutes of video footage for the Gotham Knights game, and I also saw that somebody else said that Gotham Knights was not trying to be an Arkham game, and that's the best part about it. I would say from what the footage I saw, it definitely feels like it's still, for the most part, running the same concepts as a Arkham game. Maybe on some level, in the footage I saw, I noticeably didn't see any I didn't see any like Riddler trophies or anything like that, so maybe there just aren't Riddler trophies, or maybe the version of the footage that I was seeing is not the final version. But I still saw a lot of enemies popping up and the same button mashing combo system to beat them up. Arguably maybe now less of a necessity to actually beat people up. Instead, it does seem like you might be able to run away from enemies a little bit more. But I did very much notice that in one sequence, it starts off with you kind of stealth taking down enemies or killing them in one hit, which just makes it feel like the game may be set to a very low difficulty for Jesse Cox. But as he stealthed up to each of these characters, each one of them had what sounded like a very random line of dialogue that they said. So it was always this ridiculous, let's get a quip out as far as commentary right before we get knocked out. And it was definitely without fail that you would hear this quippy line of dialogue, which almost certainly will get annoying fast, particularly once you're in an open world. The sections I saw, I think, are fairly early in the game and seem to be fairly linear. So it might very well be a case that this new Gotham Knights game doesn't have an open world at all, and it is just sequence after sequence after sequence. They show a new Harley Quinn that is implied to be the good girl version of Harley Quinn post joining Suicide Squad. Okay, so if I get this on the field, yeah, this would stop future special summons, but it wouldn't stop that card. So when you're behind the curve like this, I don't know what to do. Yep. Sniper Ranger said, "Are you playing Floranda? Don't be surprised on how many people are cursing you behind the scenes." But yeah, that is definitely my assumption, is that there is something specific about this deck that people see, and when they see it, they are unhappy, to say the least. And then they are just surrendering. Yeah, there definitely seems to be an effort in Arkham Knights to still imply Batman is actually dead. Like, they're not gonna reveal that, probably, as far as anybody that has early access. So there's an effort to focus on still implying that that's the case, and I still suspect it's not the case. But maybe they'll get rid of the open world stuff. Maybe they'll get rid of the Riddler trophies. Maybe they'll get rid of some of the ridiculous stuff. It is implied that the Joker is also dead, so it does definitely feel like, man, I guess I really should have played this at some point. So it does definitely feel like there's still a heavy connective narrative between the previous Arkham games and this, which that might paint a weird picture in which there are very few characters that could return, because I don't know if the Scarecrow or even the Riddler or half of the people, Killer Croc or the Crocodile character, whichever one that was, I don't know if they really can return in the Arkham series, having really only played 2 of 4 Arkham games before that point. That definitely does not feel like it's a reboot. and it doesn't feel like Arkham Knights is even trying to be a major game. You definitely don't feel like there's a lot of advertisement and push to say this is the game you should buy for Black Friday, and this is going to be the major AAA experience. Speaking of early access, as well as I'm still watching a lot of Archer and TV in general on live streaming service, it's a weird position. Like trying to watch Rick and Morty, you're 2-3 weeks behind. So I just saw episode 2. Apparently, also Adult Swim has this Housing Complex C anime that I've never heard of. But in all fairness, I don't think Adult Swim has really a good selection of anime shows anymore. It would be interesting if Housing Complex C as a horror anime did actually catch the attention of people, but I don't really see a reason why that would happen. It's not the old days where you can't get anime any other way. And so yeah, anybody who is watching anime is almost certainly watching it on a streaming service or online through some other service or system. And then Hulu has this like reboot of Hellraiser with a female Pinhead, which whatever. The male actor who was the guy for Pinhead for most of the Pinhead movies is just a little too old and a little too much of a not team player, I think, at this point. Arguably not his own fault for not being a team player, but like it doesn't make a lot of sense to try and bring that actor back. And so if you're going to make a change, why not make a female Pinhead? In a lot of ways, as far as the embodiment of some kind of evil creature that is going to torture and emotionally manipulate and frustrate people, a female is logically the right choice. And there have definitely been female Cenobites before. Arguably a lot of them are just representations of, hey, let's have something that is kind of creepy but also kind of sexy. But yeah, it's irritating though that some people apparently have gotten early access to the movie and are reviewing it, and even Hulu themselves have the image in their Huluween artwork, and yet the movie is not available to watch until like the 6th. Plus, they're not even telling you the release date. So I've had to literally in Hulu, and this is how bad Hulu's interface is and how bad I think a lot of interfaces are, is to actually find this new 2022 Hellraiser movie. Should I have sacrificed that? Probably not. Like, to find the movie, I had to go into the search box because it's just not anywhere to be seen otherwise. And then type in Hellraiser, and I had to get to like HELLR, I think, or at least HELL before it even popped up in the search box. So you're getting quite deep into the search. And then when I click on it, it still doesn't have a release date anywhere at all. It doesn't. It has a trailer, and that's it that you can see. But if you want to watch a movie, do you really want to watch the trailer when you want to watch the movie? Also, or would that just spoil you? So yeah, instead of watching the Hellraiser movie, which is what I wanted to watch. I ended up watching a weird French movie called Titan that I think is supposed to be like a body horror movie, but really isn't. Honestly, I don't know how you would describe the movie at all. There's very little talking from the main character. The main character is basically not a character at all. It's this girl that sleeps with a car and gets impregnated by a car, is I think the on the back of a napkin pitch and concept. But the actual movie itself, I think, is trying to tell a fairly different narrative, because the last 3/4 of the movie pretty much is built around... I should have attacked this guy, come to think of it. Yeah, the last 3/4 of the movie, I think, is really built around this fireman guy taking in the main character, who is pretending to be his missing son. So this woman who gets impregnated by a car changes her appearance and pretends to be this missing son who's been missing for years, and then the father, that's the head of a fireman crew, takes her in thinking it's a son, and is just desperate for somebody to care about. And it really is just like a story around that guy being desperate to care for somebody and find meaning in his own life. And that's about the only thing I could take from the 2-hour movie. And it's not presented in a particularly great way or anything like that. It really is just kind of silly. Being a French movie, there's a lot of nudity, but I wouldn't say there's enough to make it worth actually watching Titan because of that. And yeah, I don't know if I really could call it a body modification horror experience, really, because those scenes are fairly short and infrequent. I guess maybe the moral for the main character is that you can't hide who you are, or that you desperately need somebody who loves you. But I don't know if that was supposed to be the moral either. Yep. I will say Titan is really one of those weirder art house movies, more than even I would want to watch a lot of. As far as movies go, there was definitely the top, I would say 70-80% of movies that are just generic and will end up on cable or extended cable at some time, and anybody would sit through them and watch them, or nobody will sit through them and watch them. And then there are like horror movies. A lot of horror movies come down that category of being something that a large percentage of movie watchers or people will never watch. And then there's the last like 5%, 2% that are just super crazy art house movies that even people who are kind of movie files still would have a hard time sitting through. And that's true even in like film festivals. It's not infrequent for there to be nobody in the middle of a movie showing in some film festivals, or everybody walk out or fall asleep during the showing of a movie. But yeah, why am I talking about movies? We should be talking about video game news. Go ahead and use that to get rid of that, and we'll get rid of one of these. That should win it for me. Good. And I think in this case, I'm guaranteed a victory. We might be getting into a weird position here as we work our way up to the end of the year, where we stop really having a lot of new announcements or games to talk about. Moving on, Video Games Chronicles says the new Need for Speed game looks to be set to be revealed this week. According to Giant Bomb reporter Jeff Grubb. Honestly, at this point, I would not trust anything from Jeff Grubb, and this may create a increased problem, certainly, in which if other people start giving Jeff Grubb credibility he does not deserve, in my opinion, their credibility is going to suffer. It really only does take one liar in the news press to create just the worst mess possible, where because journalists, particularly video game journalists, are so lazy and they don't verify, they don't have the 2 sources or 3 sources or 2 or 3 independent sources to verify a story, so they're just reporting on what somebody else is reporting. But it doesn't matter whether you do that or not to the end reader, to the end user. You're putting your credibility behind everything you post on your website. So if Jeff Grubb is flippant with the truth, which I think he is, or just straight up wrong as much, if not more often than he is right, he should not be used as a news source. So mark, I guess, their words now, don't mark my words, and see if we get an announcement for a new Need for Speed. In particular, it would be interesting, but it would also be kind of a waste of time to make a chart about all the things that Jeff Grubb has said was going to happen since he started at Giant Bomb. Just start at the beginning of Giant Bomb and then mark all the things that haven't happened. Because I think there's been one too many things that have been wrong for somebody who's new. It's very much kind of the case if you went to a new mechanic and the mechanic said, "Oh yeah, I know everything about your model of your car, and I'm totally an expert in all of this, so let me go change the oil," and then he immediately opens the trunk of the car and starts trying to pour oil into the trunk of the car. Like, you don't need to go any further. If somebody is so stupid that they don't know that the oil would be in the hood in the engine of a car, or if he's trying to change the oil on an electric vehicle or something, like, you don't need to go further when somebody does something incredibly stupid and just loses all credibility in the first step. So yeah, that's really where I am with Jeff Grubb. Moving on. That's not to say it can't happen. Certainly, a Need for Speed game could be announced. A new version of Outer Worlds has been rated for the PS5, Xbox Series X and S, and PC. The Spacer's Choice Edition of Obsidian has been classified in Taiwan. We talked about this at the end of the last stream. We're still getting a lot of redundant kind of articles. I think I must have done something, or they did something to their website where now my code is like saving the link at the bottom of the first page as the first link. I don't know how I would have written the code like that, but yeah, like, one repetitive story makes sense, but 2 or 3 doesn't really quite make sense unless there are just 2 or 3 bookmarked stories happening. I guess you want to do this. So here we have a Video Game Chronicles article. It says Crystal Dynamics is seeking Legacy of Kain feedback ahead of a potential revival. The studio is asking fans what they'd like to see if the series were to make a comeback. Honestly, sometimes I think a lot of these surveys are straight up just made to keep people remembering that a series exists and buying the old versions. Particularly the Legacy of Kain old games are pretty rough to play and pretty rough to own. So that's probably not the only reason in this case, I would assume. I suspect what happened here is Crystal Dynamics has been acquired by Embracer Group. Now Crystal Dynamics has been told they need to make some game pitches as far as what funding they would get from Embracer Group as the publisher for their next project. And they probably do want to make a pitch for a Legacy of Kain game, as they're throwing spaghetti at the wall and making pitches for all kinds of games. And they want to get a kind of survey feedback to say, hey, what would this pitch really look like? What do the fans really want? The truth of the matter is I don't have quite enough faith in Embracer Group to make good games in general, and I'd like to see that change. But if they were going to make a Legacy of Kain series or reboot, it has to be a full-on reboot, and there's definitely going to be some weirdness around it, because a lot of the edgelord edgy 90s stuff that would have been kind of cool in the Legacy of Kain game wouldn't really probably work today, on top of which the gameplay of the Legacy Kain games is not particularly anything special. I imagine Square Enix laughed them out of the room if Crystal Dynamics ever tried to make a pitch for a Legacy of Kain game and didn't even know what Legacy of Kain is. And I imagine at a certain level Crystal Dynamics also doesn't want to just make Tomb Raider games for the rest of their life, and so they may be fairly desperate around the idea of avoiding that. So yeah. Some backstory around the Legacy of Kain games, like the original first Legacy of Kain came out in 1996, which is 30 years ago, about a little less than 30 years ago. Everybody still thinks and feels like it's the year 2000, but we're in 2022. It's been 22 years since the year 2000. Legacy of Kain Soul Reaver came out in 1999. The most recent entry came out in 2003, for comparison. So you're talking a 19-year gap since the last Legacy of Kain game. And while there is a niche fandom that is very rabid for new Legacy of Kain games, and everything is coming back, so there definitely is an argument for making new Legacy of Kain games. It may not be that big. You look at these graphics, and while they don't look like the worst old game graphics, they certainly aren't particularly modern graphics by any standard. And the visuals and art style around the new Legacy, the visuals and art style around the new potential Legacy of Kain game very possibly will look incredibly different and not have that same feel. Moving on, Video Games Chronicle says that Xbox says Sony and Nintendo will remain the biggest even after the Activision Blizzard deal. Microsoft has launched a new website arguing the benefits of the Activision Blizzard merger. There's some more rumors around this, certainly, but yeah, they are putting effort and money into this. I'm still not 100% sure that this isn't just a rich person's attempt at corporate protectionism. That's kind of what I suspected when this was first all announced, and it kind of feels like the beginnings of the idea of an Activision Blizzard merger was announced a year or two ago, but honestly, I think it was only announced maybe 8 months ago or so. There's just been so much talk around it, and it's just been considered a fairly big deal. But yeah, I said this early on, and I still kind of stand by the thought that the reason that this Activision Blizzard deal may be going through and may be getting pushed through so hard has very little to do with Microsoft really wanting to own Activision Blizzard titles and or Activision Blizzard employees, which owning employees sounds like slavery, but let's be honest, working because you're indebted is just slavery with more steps, and that's the case that most people are in. Anyways, that was not the tinfoil hat rant I meant to go on. The tinfoil hat rant I meant to go on was to say I think this might be a case where Microsoft knows that the video game industry looks really, really bad because of all of the terrible things that have been leaked out that have happened at Activision Blizzard, and that there's a decent chance of actual unionization happening at Activision Blizzard, and so they are hoping that they can acquire Activision Blizzard and eliminate the problems that are creating bad news press around the video game industry, get rid of possibly Bobby Kotick, or just get rid of middle management, and then say Bobby Kotick is still good enough to be in charge. I wouldn't be surprised one bit if Phil Spencer or somebody else at Microsoft is just best friends with Bobby Kotick, and they're trying to pull his butt out of the fire as much as possible to keep him employed and keep him empowered. But yeah, by potentially acquiring Activision Blizzard and then trying to push the narrative that everything has been fixed and there's been a major cultural shift, that's almost certainly what they'll say as soon as they acquire it, is that we're going to clean house and have a major cultural shift, and they'll sacrifice a few middle managers, but not change too much. Because at a certain level, I definitely don't think Microsoft needs Activision Blizzard. And certainly on other levels, if Microsoft did have the games from Activision Blizzard, we may have better games. Overwatch 2 is apparently getting DDoS right now, but also I don't think anybody really is happy with Overwatch 2 if they even are getting into the game to play it. People didn't sound happy around what was being announced before it launched, and they definitely didn't seem like they were happy around the idea of Overwatch 1 just being cancelled on day one, shut down on day one. That is probably a good lesson to say, hey, let's leave Overwatch 1 running and have some overlap in case we have any server problems. But yeah, if it, to speak against my own tinfoil hat theory though, if it really was corporate protectionism, and that was the only reason why Microsoft was trying to acquire Activision Blizzard, just to keep Bobby Kotick in power, to keep unions out of a major video game publisher, video game developer, company, it doesn't then make the most amount of sense that Sony is trying so hard to make sure this merger doesn't happen. And certainly I'm looking at it from one perspective. It may very well be just Call of Duty is the deal. Like it very well may be a case where they have realized that the Halo game doesn't work, and they need to get away from whatever engine Halo is developed in, and they need to go to Unreal, so they need potential Unreal Engine programmers. Yeah, and that could be the case. And they may just need to bounce between Call of Duties and Halo games and not try and have a new Halo every 4 years, but instead trying to have a Halo every 6 years and then fill the gap with Call of Duty games. It would be interesting certainly to see if Sony's part in fighting against the Activision Blizzard merger would have been minimal or non-existent if Jim Ryan and Sony of California was not in charge. If it was still Sony of Japan, I wonder if the merger would have not been objected to anywhere as hard or at all. So that it may just be that Jim Ryan is playing hardball. And certainly it is mostly speculation, so I'm just really wasting a lot of time just rambling about the merger every time it comes up. But I would say that... What was I going to say? Let's activate this. This may really ruin his strategy. Just banishing a card instead of sending it to the graveyard. Yeah, I still want to point out though, I and most people still assume that this merger will happen in some form factor. It would be very weird if, say, the Call of Duty company in particular wasn't allowed to be part of the merger, or any one company was not allowed to be part of the merger. I wouldn't be surprised if, with the multiple different countries involved, if some small part has to be sold off and some negotiation has to happen. But that's about as far as my opinion is willing to shift, is that they may have to make some kind of promissory note contract and say something like Call of Duty will be available to other companies such as PlayStation for 8 years, 10 years. But I still heavily think it's going to be approved with little limitation. So everybody's going to be a dragon. Yeah, I'm leaning towards thinking that this card is actually much better than this card in a lot of situations. And that once again banishes another card. So he literally only has this card and whatever he draws. And if that was a trap, he's for some reason not activating it yet. I've had this slight fantasy, it has nothing to do with video games, of potentially teaching a computer security class to like kids or the elderly, something you would like teach at a learning annex or something. I don't know why I would be qualified or why I would bother to do this, but I feel like a fun activity, although also maybe it would be a little silly, it is to have as the first activity have everybody fold a tinfoil hat and actually make a tinfoil hat, and then I imagine we would put some kind of mementos or mnemonics on it to remember actual security, cyber internet security ideas and strategies, and then they could take the tinfoil hat and stick it on top of their computer monitor or on their computer desk and always look at that tinfoil hat and go, yep, this is I remember what I learned there. But you potentially lose some credibility in doing something cutesy like that. Certainly I've been in classes where they want you to do something cutesy and silly as just to get to know you, warm up exercise, and it's often done on the first day, and it just leads to, or led to me not really respecting the knowledge and the intelligence of the teacher, which in a lot of cases in a lot of classes there was some legitimacy around not respecting the knowledge of the teachers, because particularly in the computer classes I took, there was at least 2 out of 3 of the teachers that taught me computer stuff didn't really know enough computer stuff to be teaching the class, and were teaching out of the book, and were just not really competent to be teaching what they were teaching. And I don't agree with the idea that, well, a teacher could teach anything if they're a good teacher. Not one bit. You need to have some competency of the subject matter you're teaching. Honestly, I do think the third teacher I had did understand a decent amount of what he was teaching, because he was like a C++ teacher, and at the time I think he actually did have a decent amount of knowledge, but I question if maybe he didn't have enough practical knowledge even for the time and wasn't really keeping up with the times. So I really do wonder, when I was taught C++, was I taught a version 4.0 of C++ when in the real world everybody was using something like a version 10.0. And I don't believe he probably knew much more or remembered much more than what was being taught from his books, which the books are old, and that's part of the problem too. But trying to teach a programming class based on books, that's why there's been a certain level of improvement on the idea of having websites be the teaching books for programming languages. As I'm more looking with interest towards the Rust programming language, their emphasis really is to go to their website to learn the language, not to buy somebody's book or be taught in a class, so that they can change the website and update the website with any new versions, or better explanations. Really am just rambling today, aren't I? But that's what this is supposed to be for, really. Is that the whole reason I stream is because there are things I want to talk about, and I just want to be kind of a normal person rambling. I do want to talk about video game news, but I'm just not professional enough to focus it solely as video game news. And honestly, I don't know how many people really would want that anyways. How many people do watch the local news where is just talking about news story after news story after news story? Even when you look at some of the bigger, like CNN type. Oh, should I really tribute this? No. Like, even at the big CNN type news channels, more and more they try to make the characters reporting the news part of the story and part of the personality. It is This Week Tonight with Don Lemon or whatever it is, or I don't even know what CNN has, and I couldn't name a single person on Fox News correctly. But yeah, when you get into the later night shows and later evening shows, it stops being a nameless presenter or a presenter you don't need to know the name of, just presenting news as it breaks, as it comes in, and it starts being this personality thing where you kind of have to like the person who's telling you the news. And sometimes they do talk about themselves, and sometimes they do involve themselves, instead of just being the computer that spits out the information. And maybe that's a mistake. Maybe I should just be the computer that spits out the information as far as video game news. It would be shorter streams by far. But no, I don't think I want to do that. If I was going to do that, I would hire somebody, or I would program a artificial intelligence, like some kind of virtual AI, to just report on the news. I could see doing that, certainly, having like a YouTube short type thing where every news story is getting read out by a virtual voice actor or virtual AI. But if I was to go in that route, I don't know if I'm really being very fair use as far as repeating news stories at that point either. What can I get here? Just that? Nah, don't worry about that. Speaking of news, though, here's some big news. The chairman of From Software's parent company has been charged with bribery, and in Japan, the accusation is as good as a conviction, because even amongst Japanese people have like Japan has like a 99% confession rate or conviction rate in their court system. Their court system is not designed around the idea of innocent until proven guilty. Now, at a certain level, societally, they tend to balance that off by not charging too many people with criminal activity. It gives definitely a premise and an idea that not that much criminal activity actually happens in Japan, when in actuality, at a certain level, they're all criminals. Like the whole pachinko parlor gambling things, gambling technically illegal. So if you are actually considered every single person who went to a pachinko parlor once in their life as a criminal in Japan, you'd be hitting, I imagine, over 60% of every Japanese citizen. But yeah. So from this accusation, well, even in America, in the United States, if a big CEO of something was charged with bribery, I would assume that they were guilty. Like, anytime anybody rich is charged with anything, I assume that they're guilty. Although, notably, the reason why I assume people that are big and powerful and rich don't get charged is because they are usually bribing in one way or the other, not always with just money, but sometimes with just special favors and influence. So, yeah. This guy is charged with bribery, and I fully believe he might be guilty of it. Kadokawa Group, though, should be noticed. Or is it Kadokawa Corporation now? I thought it was Group before. Should be mentioned, though, that they do a lot more than just video games. Like they were kind of a big player in anime. Um, it it oversees the entire corporation, and it has numerous publishing, media, film, and video game companies. He was arrested September 14th on bribery, so it's taken a little bit of a while. He's now been charged with bribing a member of the Tokyo Olympics Organizing Committee with 69 million yen, approximately $476,000 US dollars. Yeah, that sounds obvious. That sounds believable by far. Like, the Olympics organizing committees of their different ilk are, I imagine, run by the overall International Olympic Organizing Committee, which is incredibly corrupt. So I imagine corruption around the Olympics is super high. I wonder what they potentially got for the bribery, or what they were trying to get for the bribery, as far as what property really did they want highlighted or shown during the Olympics. Whether it may very well have just been a song or something. Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if there's more convictions or arrests around bribery in the Olympics. Noticeably, the Olympics was a while ago. So clearly this investigation has been going for a while. And noticeably, the Olympics never, Winter or Summer Olympics, never really benefit the host country as much as it benefits the rich people in that host country, because the tax breaks are really hurting the average citizens and you're getting nothing for it. But specifically, I would say in Japan's case, with the Olympics being delayed, that was more of an embarrassment. And then with the pandemic happening all around the Olympics, that certainly hurt any kind of tourism that might have recouped or hurt or improved the economic situation for the host country. Japan has been pretty much in lockdown ever since, so if there was any renewed interest in tourism to go to Japan years later after the Olympics, that's been lost too. So they got very unlucky, to say the least. There's a full quote here. Today I've decided to resign as chairman of Kadokawa. Maybe, I don't know how you'd actually pronounce it in Japanese. It's easier just to make up how you think it sounds in your own mind and go that. Recently, not only I, but 2 other Kadokawa employees were arrested and prosecuted in connection with corruption scandal involving the Tokyo Organizing Committee in the Olympics and Paralympic Games. I feel it's necessary to take responsibility for this incident. It is a great ordeal. Gotta play. This incident is a great ordeal for Kadokawa, and I believe that it needs a new structure in order to overcome it. So maybe he already pled guilty. They're not they're not really mentioning that. Kadokawa Corporation is the majority owner of the Elden Ring and Dark Souls studio From Software, owning 70%, with Sony and Tencent owning the rest. It also owns Spike Chunsoft, which has its own problems at the moment, with Chaos Head Noah not being allowed on Steam, which Spike Chunsoft owns Danganronpa, Mystery Dungeon, and Zero Escape. So it really sucks that I just finished playing Zero Escape, Zero Time Dilemma, and don't get to mention that as a odd fact, but honestly, it's not really relevant to the game anyway, so mentioning it would be it really would be kind of inappropriate to mention it, or just be an odd fact to mention. Yeah, I just have nothing I can do here. I can summon as many of these as I want on the field, but unless I put them in defense position, it doesn't help me. Suppose it's also worth mentioning that the former Kadokawa Games CEO Yoshimi Yasuda, who probably does not want to be mentioned in the same article, is currently leading a remake of the cult action game Lollipop Chainsaw, which was published by Kadokawa in Japan. Yasuda's new company, Dragami Games, acquired the rights from Kadokawa and is now working on a new version despite the lack of involvement from the creative director Suda51 and co-writer James Gunn. Yes, that James Gunn who made several movies in Hollywood. And that arguably is bad journalism to mention someone else in an article when the article is about the president being arrested for bribery. You don't get a lot of stories like that. It's probably pretty common to bribe people. So it may be a new aspect in general around people getting prosecuted for bribery. Yeah. And then I guess if we were going to get into just Japanese politics in general, not just because maybe it will affect Japanese video game development. North Korea, in a big provocation, did shoot a long-range missile directly over Japanese mainland. So that is definitely a big provocation. Now, arguably, I don't think North Korea outwardly says they want to just bomb North Korea. I don't think North Korea outwardly says they want to just bomb Japan, although they probably would be more than fine to bomb Japan for one reason or another. I think actively what they want to do is fly over Japan very, very far and hit Hawaii or the eastern side of the United States, which, yeah, that's going to be a lot harder to do, certainly, because of the distance and the accuracy you would need. But inevitably, if you are targeting the eastern side of the United States or Hawaii, you are potentially going over Japanese mainland. Yeah, and it's kind of, yeah, you have to pay attention, I suppose, particularly if you're in charge of a country, to North Korea at all times. Otherwise, you are going to have this situation where everybody's focused around Ukraine and Russia. Meanwhile, China is going to try and invade Taiwan, and North Korea is going to try and invade South Korea, or send a missile into Japan, or like the entire Asia could fall apart. India might try to invade Pakistan. Pakistan might try to invade India. Iran certainly is having a potential revolution that they're cracking down on, shooting live bullets at protesters. But yeah, as soon as the United States, as it thinks of itself as the peacekeepers of the world, even though they probably really aren't, as soon as the U.S. loses attention or the will to potentially take over a fight for a different country, everybody sees an opportunity to do something different and attack their neighbors or cause more conflict, push their borders further apart. Let's see. I probably need to stop playing at this point and just focus on the news, because we do have a decent amount of news compared to like Monday, where we didn't really have that much news. We even have a decent amount of Gamatsu news, even though it is Golden Week, and I imagine there isn't going to be that much of an issue. Yeah, at a certain level, if Amazon Prime was going to have a sale, they might as well have just called it Golden Week and tried to have some kind of weird emphasis around the idea of selling Asian products in particular, or products that would appeal to the Asian market. Amazon.com certainly is full of those kinds of products, but they don't tend to promote them because they tend to be things that get returned because they don't work, or they're not just that appealing as products in the first place. Like the crazy Tuya home automation stuff in particular, as far as electronics, I'd love to see that stuff go on sale, but almost certainly it wouldn't go on sale. So yeah, like right now, the thing I think I might buy during the Amazon Prime sale is house shoes. And that's just because I need new house shoes. I go through them once. I go through like 1 or 2 pair a year. And that's about all I'm thinking about. Back to video game news. Let me just end my turn first. PlayStation is looking into further investments to support its PC and mobile push. The company has been increasing its presence in the PC space in recent years, which, okay, I mean, as a PC gamer, I'm happy with that idea. Oh, there was something else I was gonna say that I just thought of. Yeah, I wouldn't be super surprised if Sony of California is thinking about just going full PC and stop making hardware, particularly in the part shortage. That would make a lot of sense. I imagine they're not making a ton of profit off of the PlayStation 5, enough that it would make sense to stay in hardware alone. So if they could just become a PC only platform in 10 years, maybe that is what they want to do. At least they want to have that option open to them, I think. Right. So when we do this again, I want to just add variety into the hand. But this may not actually work. Yeah, I think this one works. Let's see. Then I think this lets you normal summon one more thing. Nope, it doesn't. So I should have, at that point, either summon this or this. So a mirror force here could destroy things. Let's see. Moving on. Video Games Chronicles still. We still got a lot of articles actually from them. Sony's investment from Software could lead to movies and TV shows, says Holst. H-U-L-S-T. I have no idea who Holst is, though. PlayStation Studios head Herman Holst told Reuters. Okay. Yeah, but you think about the From Software games, aren't those pretty much just Dark Souls, Elden Ring games? I don't know how you make a movie around Dark Souls and Elden Rings and it work or make sense. It feels like something that very much would have a chance of just being like one of the Netflix Full Metal Alchemist live action movies, one of those awful Japanese live action movies based on animes. Like, I just don't think you would have the budget to take what is a very deep story, I would assume, that is actually trying to be told with little hints towards story here and there in Elden Ring. I don't know how you boil that down into a movie or even into a TV show. Let's see. We'll take the two smallest guys and put that there. I will say though that Zero Time Dilemma definitely felt like it was written to be an anime series. Each memory fragment easily could have been 1 or 2 or 3 episodes, and then you could have moved on to a short arc in the next 2 or 3 episodes. And the timeline aspects around Zero Time Dilemma potentially could have an entire timeline focused around being the focus of one season. I will say I do think that there probably was some thoughts in the development of Elden Ring, just based on the trailers and the way I saw Elden Ring advertised. It definitely felt like there may have been some thoughts to make it a more cinematic experience. Yeah. One more win, we get to gold tier 5. But that doesn't mean we have to actually try to go for that today. So we have most of the daily quests, except for duel and solo mode and special summoning things. And we have hit 1,000 ranks in 1,000 rank duels for a lifetime. That gives us 100 gems, and that means pretty much we'll never get that secret quest ever again, I imagine. So we are getting very close to finishing several of these lifetime achievements. Interesting that our Duelist rank still is only at like 30 out of 50, even though Duelist rank really doesn't mean anything at all. And the rewards for getting a Duelist rank up are pathetically small. Rewards for normal summoning 3,000 monsters is pathetically small. You really would have hoped that these rewards would have been like 10,000 gems or so. Something really, really big. as a gimmick to turn free-to-play players into people who would get used to opening packs and then eventually run out of gems and then want to spend real-world money to get new gems. The small trickle that the game gives is just so incredibly small that it doesn't get you into that gambling mentality. Or at least it doesn't get me into the gambling mentality. Let's see there. We'll take this one super rare after opening 10 legacy packs. And we'll call that a victory and not open any more legacy packs. It's kind of foolish to potentially chase after an ultra rare. We are starting to see a bit of a decrease in new cards amongst the legacy collection of cards, which that's to be expected, but a little sad too, because we're getting down to less than half by far. Yeah, let's see, 6, 7 out of 16, 20 in that draw. Alright, well, we desperately need to move through the news, so let's just focus on the news. The medium is being made into a TV show. Bloober Team has been inspired by the success of the cyberpunk edgerunners and Arcane. That's probably a bad reason to try and turn a video game into a TV show, and I think it is also worth pointing out that while I don't know about the Arcane anime, I assume it's an anime, Cyberpunk Edgerunners is not really based on the Cyberpunk game. It's based in the same universe as the Cyberpunk game, whereas the plan here seems to be to straight up take the narrative of a game that not that many people really even played and turn it into a TV show. And certainly I make these criticisms all the time that this game feels more like it should have been a movie, or this movie feels more like it should be a game. Actually, it's fairly rare for me to see a movie that feels like it should be a video game. But yeah, I don't think after the fact, after you've done one, after you made your decision, you can switch to a different medium. Like even Zero Time Dilemma, which obviously should have been an anime, considering the back half of that game has no interaction at all, or very little. Even at that point, I don't think I would now sit through an anime based off of the non-Ray games or Zero Time Dilemma. If I was going to watch it, it would have to have different storylines and different time branches. It would have to have completely brand new animation. It would have to probably have different characters and different voice actors. I didn't even bother mentioning it, but like the Akane and Junpei in Zero Time Dilemma as characters are not really characters that I liked so much, even though they were the main characters of the first game, and I'm not sure I really even liked them that much in the first game. But then I didn't even really recognize them because you had flat 2D animation showing a character named Akane and Junpei in the first game, and now you have this kind of ugly 3D animation being shown to a character named Akane and Junpei. Zero Time Dilemma is also a little weird in the fact that seemingly only Akane and Junpei and maybe a couple other characters in the first game were Japanese, and so everybody else was from some other country or from the United States or America or the West, which arguably maybe they should have all been Japanese and it would have made a little bit more sense. Let's see, moving on. October's first Xbox Game Pass title for console, PC, and cloud have been dated. They include Chivalry 2, Scorn, and Plague Tale Requiem, which Plague Tale Requiem is fairly new, and Scorn will be basically day one release. They're also giving you the Double Fine, so Microsoft owned Costume Quest, which it makes sense to release that, I guess, every October for free. Walking Dead games. It looks like maybe season 1 and season 2. They don't have a real image here. And then let's see what else. Let's see. Chivalry, Walking Dead Complete first season, Walking Dead season 2, Dyson Sphere program, Costume Quest, Scorn, A Plague Tale Requiem. What's leaving is Bloodroots, Echo Generation, Into the Pit, Ring of Pain, Sable, and The Good Life, all games that I doubt very many people will even miss or have known existed in the first place. Hitman 3's roguelike freelancer mode has been delayed again, according to Video Games Chronicles. It will now launch in January of 2023 as a free update following a closed technical test. The roguelike element as a concept around the Hitman game is kind of necessary to keep people playing what is a fairly shallow game otherwise. So the fact that that's not day one still kind of highlights the problems that the Hitman series has had in their reboot, just not having enough time or support, or arguably maybe they just don't have enough programmers that are efficient enough. We may be into the season of delays at this point. Company of Heroes has been delayed until 2023. So okay. A Nintendo Direct for the Super Mario Bros. Movie is coming this week. The presentation will include the first trailer of the film. They put out a screenshot that is slightly bigger than this. This image has been cropped, so you actually can't see the Super Mario World like big hills with a Princess Peach's castle on the top of it. As far as what you can see in this screenshot, you've got a lot of different colored Goomba type things, and Captain Toad maybe is gonna show up in this, maybe not. Captain Toad being a particular Goomba like character. And then you see the back of Mario and you see he's animated. Noticeably not a lot of junk in his trunk, so that was a decision. Fairly tall shoes, which kind of makes sense when you kind of look at the scale of him. He is way bigger than the Goomba characters, but not super big enough that he would actually be a human. And we've seen in like Mario Odyssey, Mario seems to not actually be human height compared to the citizens of Pauline City in Mario City. What was that called? The Donkey Kong City. But yeah, most of the consternation around this movie has been the voice acting choice, not the actual appearance. And Video Game Chronicles, for no reason, is linking to the complete history of Mario Kart games as a video. I imagine, looking at the colorfulness of this and all, you're going to have a fine movie, hopefully. It is very questionable as to what the narrative of the movie is and what happens. It'd be fairly silly if it wasn't something fairly obvious, like Bowser kidnapping Princess Peach and going on an adventure to save her. But it might go in a different direction. But yeah, really, people should just wait and see. I imagine kids of this generation will watch the movie and enjoy it. There's not likely to be a lot of competition as far as animated movies for the rest of the year anyways. I don't think Disney is putting out anything actually for kids. I couldn't even tell you what the next Disney movie is, because in a funny way, Disney doesn't bother to put out trailers or announcements for movies that get picked up. So Disney could announce a brand new movie coming out 2 weeks from now, or they could have no animated movie for kids for 6 months to a year from now. Let's see. Moving on, Chronicle says Sony says that live service push doesn't mean it's leaving single players behind, games behind. I did see a Reddit post, and it makes a fairly obvious point in that they've announced this Horizon Zero Dawn remake and it coming off as a very pointless remake, in the fact that they were able to very quickly say, hey, we could have the original God of War trilogy remastered and released, or we could have some of the other games from the PlayStation 2 era, PlayStation 3 era remade and released. Making a remaster around Horizon Zero Dawn really seems ridiculous, and it really seems like it's a doubling down on trying to have this new generation of games be what PlayStation is about and forgetting about what the old generation of games were. I would definitely prefer them remaking something like Heavenly Sword or something really ridiculous that people aren't even really expecting. But yeah, definitely I would love to see a PC port and a remake or remaster of the original God of War games. Even if they would be fairly rough to play these days. Moving on, here's the first gameplay trailer for EA's Dead Space remake. Which, okay. At this point, I don't even want to bother to watch the trailer, so I'm just going to say check it out if you want to check it out. Looking at the screenshot, does this look like Dead Space? Yes. Is it going to play like Dead Space? I hope so. Is it going to sound like Dead Space? I hope so. Is it going to do anything new? I doubt it. Maybe it will avoid some problems and start for a potential trilogy, and maybe it'll have new levels and new upgrades and new monsters, all of which would be good things. But I'm still firmly in the thought that I am more interested in a new property of the Callisto Protocol than a Dead Space rehashing. CD Projekt Red is officially working on a Cyberpunk sequel, a Witcher trilogy, and more. The new Cyberpunk will prove the full power and potential of the Cyberpunk universe. That's promising a lot after delivering fairly little before. I think it is also worth pointing out that in the effect of announcing all of this, basically hours later, maybe a day later, the co-president of CD Projekt Red, who had been there for 30 years, announced that he's leaving the company. I believe is the story. We'll get to that in a second to confirm the exact facts and dates there. But so making a huge announcement and then making an announcement that somebody's leaving the company indicates that either the co-president was not on board with doing any of these things, or that they've just made a bunch of promises that are empty promises to cover up the fact that they're losing their co-president. Although maybe it's a good thing they're losing the co-president, because everything I've heard about CD Projekt Red is that they are pretty terrible as far as the management level employees. So maybe there is a shuffling of who's in charge, and maybe we'll see CD Projekt Red run their business a little bit better, which maybe, and this is a lot of maybes, will lead to better CD Projekt Red games in the future. But arguably, it's important to remember, to my understanding, CD Projekt Red has made one good game, and that's Witcher 3. It was, I believe, a different company that made Witcher 1 and 2, and those are actually fairly different games compared to Witcher 3. And then it was CD Projekt Red that really blew it on Cyberpunk 2077. And arguably they're just too ambitious, and they should make smaller games and more of them to start with. There is an alternate universe where Cyberpunk 2077 sold decently well just because it was half as ambitious and just didn't have any car driving elements in it, and didn't really have open world elements, and really tried to be more like Deus Ex Human Revolution, where it was small little city blocks and just a lot of talking to people and a lot of stealth and interaction. Moving on, PlayStation games will wait at least a year before their PC release, except for live service titles. So they're giving you a guarantee of being a second-class citizen, according to PlayStation Studios head Herman Holst, I guess, in the same interview, I imagine. So yeah, if you're a PC gamer, you're not being treated. You're getting a guarantee of being treated poorly as far as the release of games, and that's at least a year. That's not in the 6 weeks of a launch window or the 6 months of a launch window, unless it's a live service game in which they can milk everybody the same. Then they will maybe release it day and date with the PlayStation release, which arguably this gives an odd insight on how much they think they get and how much they think they profit from a general live service game. Even though we don't have actual numbers to compare, we have an X and a Y calculation here, where X is exclusivity to being on the PlayStation or being on consoles, at least, is equal to Y of how much we think we're going to get from microtransactions in live service games. And so X times 365 days, at least, is equal to a live service game. And that's an interesting calculation to have in the back of your head, although it's a very vague calculation without any certainty to it, but it does show where they are thinking. Here we go. Same story from Video Games Chronicle. E3 EA will reveal a new Need for Speed this week. Let's see. It's been confirmed, so I guess in this case Jeff Grubb was right. But okay. Credit where credit is due, I guess. Let's see. The UK competition watchdog sets March 23rd for the deadline for ruling on Xbox Activision deals. The CMA is currently conducting an in-depth probe of the proposed acquisition, which that's basically not news. It's an announcement for an announcement, or just a procedural announcement that they've set a deadline for a ruling. Which, if they miss that deadline, what happens? Who knows? And really, let's see. CD Projekt Red's first original IP, codename Hadar, will be another RPG series. Company says not to expect any surprises in terms of a new franchise genre. Which is weird because I thought this codename Hadar was just a full-on sequel to CD Projekt Cyberpunk 2077. Interesting. This is conflicting information from what I thought I had heard before. So it's going to be an RPG game, but it's going to be an RPG game that probably is either in a different kind of way, a different kind of fantasy, or a different kind of sci-fi. If it's not a fantasy or a sci-fi game and it's an RPG series, I don't know what it is, though. I mean, it could be like a gothic horror with Cthulhu, certainly. It could be set in the real world. It could be certainly a different kind of fantasy. Could be a western. I guess there's plenty of genres if you just want an RPG game. Arguably, though, I would say, are these RPG elements of Cyberpunk 2077 and Witcher 3 good enough to copy those ideas to a third game, or not? Are they at the top of their class as far as RPG elements, or are they actually in the middle of the class or at the bottom of the class? There definitely were some interesting things in Witcher 3 as far as getting collectibles and then making potions and tinctures and drinking them and putting them on your swords and all of that. But most of that really paled in comparison to the actual story being shown. So much so that if you just ran through the game or had a mod that let you run through the game and not do any of the RPG elements in Witcher 3, you'd still have an amazingly good experience. And it got really bad at one point in Witcher 3 where you were just running around getting items and doing RPG stuff, and it felt like filler content. Having not played Cyberpunk 2077, I don't know how bad the RPG elements are, but yeah, I don't look to CD Projekt Red for RPG games. I look more towards Bethesda, for as stupid as that is as far as role-playing games. And I imagine there are some other game companies that I just can't think of that are better at role-playing games. Moving on, the Mortal Kombat creator, I guess that's Ed Boon, says the 30th anniversary is the main focus. A new game is going to come in due time, which it's fairly weird. Apparently Ed Boon is the co-creator. I don't know who the other person would be. It's fairly weird to say, hey, we're going to have a 30th anniversary focus or announcement or something, but it's not going to be around a video game for a video game company. Like, it would be the equivalent of a parent saying, I'm so busy focusing on your 10th birthday as a kid, telling a kid, I'm so focused on setting up and celebrating your 10th birthday that I don't have time to feed you tonight. Like, don't worry, you'll get food next week when your birthday actually happens, but we just can't bother to feed you until then. So just starve. Like, you can't do one or the other to nurture a property in the same way of nurturing a kid, as the analogy is I'm trying to make is. You have to be working on a game, and if you're going to have a 30th anniversary anything, you need to have some kind of teaser or announcement to say about a new game. Even if you were just going to say we're going to re-release and remaster or make a collection of the older games, even that would be somewhat new content. Having a general sale for an anniversary is not enough, though. Moving on, FIFA 23's first patch reduces penalty accuracy and improves dribbling animations. I guess for FIFA players that might be a good thing. Nintendo is going to be streaming 2 concerts from Japan this weekend. The Animal Crossing and Splatoon shows will be part of a Nintendo Live event. This, I assume, is in part because of Golden Week. And I guess at a certain level, we may just get more and more of this from Nintendo, where they try to have cool little concerts and cool little things to show instead of making announcements, and try to make Nintendo more of a lifestyle streamer instead of Nintendo just being the video game developer that's just always going to get demands of making more video games and making different video games. So it would be fairly shocking if these events happen and they have a lot to announce. I wouldn't be surprised if they have very little to announce and are just doing the live streams. And when you look at this, it does kind of feel like it is just going to be almost like a virtual AI VTuber event, where I don't think anybody is actually any real humans will show up on screen. This sounds pretty crazy, and we're still at Video Game Chronicles articles. The core Cyberpunk 2077 team members, quote, are moving to the United States to lead the sequel studio. CD Projekt will establish a new North American studio to work on Project Orion, and I guess Project Orion is the official sequel to Cyberpunk 2077, so that explains my confusion I had heard Project Hodor was the sequel. Maybe I heard that from Jeff Grubb. Maybe I heard that from somebody else. Who knows? I don't remember. So, and I repeated it, so it's my own fault. And at the end of the day, it's insane, though. Like, incredibly insane. You can't have people moving to the United States, changing their entire lives, just to lead to a sequel, to be in charge of a sequel studio. Although in business that oddly kind of is the case, particularly in video game business, where if you want to be the boss, you've got to be the boss of the new office, and you've got to hope that the new office succeeds and doesn't get shut down too fast. Now there is, I suppose, an aspect here that they may very well be happy to move to the US because CD Projekt Red is close enough to Russia that they might be affected with that. I don't think CD Projekt Red is actually in Ukraine, but getting out of Europe, or the eastern part of Europe in general, might be very appealing to a lot of people. And so if you're getting maybe 2 or 3 people to move, that's not that much. And core is a nebulous term. Certainly you could say 2 people are the core team members, or it could be 20 out of 28 people are moving to the United States. And I guess immigration has no problem with people moving to the United States and bringing business and jobs to the United States. Or maybe they've figured all that out. So, but that does seem fairly crazy to change your life just for a job. Unfortunately, that is the case for a lot of people. That if you actually want to succeed in an industry, you often probably do need to move to a bigger city where you have more opportunity and you just rub elbows with more people and make better connections. Otherwise, you stay stagnant in smaller cities, and while you may be the big fish in a small pond, it often still won't pay enough to have you live a comfortable, stable life in those small cities. Yeah, you may notice fairly obviously that there are no billionaires or millionaires that live in tiny 10,000 population or less towns. If they do live somewhere in that area, they tend to own the entire town and actually just vacation there and still do all their business in places like New York or Los Angeles or maybe Austin. But yeah, particularly in the United States, if you're not somewhere in one of the top biggest towns, you're not really gonna succeed business-wise in most cases. Moving on, Street Fighter 6 beta codes have been sent out, which is that really news? That feels like almost bragging on the part of Video Games Chronicles, just to say, hey, we're a mainstream video game journalist site, or at least we know some mainstream video game journalists, so we can now announce that those people, those special elite people, have been given beta codes. Although maybe I'm taking that a little too personally. Maybe it is more of a case that anybody that signed up to be part of the beta, it could have been any random person, is now getting their beta codes, so check your email. So there's almost news at that point, but telling some small subset of the population to check their email still really doesn't feel like news. The PlayStation Stars loyalty program is now live in North and South America. The service will be rolled out in Europe on October 13th, which, okay. Headline is only really necessary for that one. Sony says the latest PlayStation 5 improves system performance. I wouldn't be surprised if this also patches out the hack that they just found to jailbreak the PlayStation 5 through the browser. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if there's an update there. Apparently PlayStation Stars will give top members priority chat support in the West also. This was something they announced for the Japanese Eastern version of it. Which, yeah, it's incredibly insane and stupid to have that be a feature and then admit that it's a feature. Really? That's not how customer support works. I said that in a previous rant. Like, people are going to be calling for password resets and potentially get priority just because they're paying more for something simplistic, when somebody with a real problem that deserves more priority and deserves to be escalated to a smarter or more educated technician will not get that priority at the same time. Moving on, they have 7 minutes of the Wild Hearts game if you want to check that out. Video Games Chronicles does. videogameschronicle.com. Sledgehammer Games is reportedly developing a Call of Duty Advanced Warfare 2. I guess that's believable for a rumor, if we're just reporting on rumors. Leaked Need for Speed Unbound screenshots reveal their art style, which for racing games, what does that really mean? As far as art style, the art style is the same for all of them. It's hyper realistic, as pretty as possible. I see in this one screenshot a lot of reflections and possibly ray tracing around neon sights, but really it's still just going to be pretty cars. Like, I would kind of kill for a racing game where it was a flat 2D anime art style or some kind of weird surreal art style for a racing game, but nobody's going to do that except for Nintendo, who does the Mario Kart art style, which changes the cars into carts and adds Mario characters. Let's see, moving on. Overwatch 2 servers are down following a quote mass DDoS attack on launch day. And then the update says, following reports of improvements, Overwatch 2 servers appear to be down again. Yeah, I don't know how anybody wouldn't have seen this coming, though. Every time there's a new launch of anything that could possibly be big, you need to have enough bandwidth for it. And it's kind of crazy that there isn't services out there that spin up 200-300% more servers than you need before for your launch day, your launch window, and then you can back down to your actual needed amount of servers after the fact. You'd think AWS, Amazon Warehouse servers, or Microsoft Azure servers, hosting services would do that. And then you could have like one website that just has servers that they spin up for one company one week and then spin up for another company the next week, and they rent out their servers, making profit that way. Late to the party, Video Games Chronicles is reporting on this. Reportedly, and I said this probably 3 or 4 days ago from my other sources, Nintendo is cracking down on, quote, uncensored boobs and hentai games. Adult game publishers claims an adult game publisher claims its upcoming titles have been rejected. This is Gamuzi making this claim. Their next game, Hot Tentacle Shoot, has been rejected by Nintendo because of an allegedly refreshed stance on adult content on the eShop. We have received an answer from Nintendo, and we have a confirmation that they do not allow uncensored boobs on their consoles now. Okay. Which you would have thought that would have been just the default stance from day one, but it hasn't, weirdly. And I think in this story it is fair to point out that Sony has cracked down a lot more, but Nintendo is going that way too. Nintendo has not received as much embarrassment as you might think for having actual games with hentai in the name, hentai uni, for instance, being shown here. And see, that comes with like this weird Bayonetta 3 being a AAA game, or at least a AA game, coming out at the same time, because they're going to have some odd comparisons there, for sure, in that publishers are going to say, well, you pulled the rug out from under us and you didn't tell us, and we spent all this time developing a game, although they probably only spent a couple weeks developing the games. Nintendo has that family-friendly feeling to it. So the fact that from day one they didn't reject it seems weird, and now the fact that they are starting to reject it feels weird. It's one less place. There basically are no consoles now that can have any adult content on them at all. So consoles effectively at this point are just for babies. They are just for kids. And you have to be a PC gamer if you want to see adult content. And you probably have to go to some non-Steam storefronts like Nutaku, or some other place to actually play adult content games. Now, most of these adult content games, in fact the vast majority of them, suck, but that doesn't mean anything, really. They were allowed to exist. They had their freedom of speech before, on as far as an artist presenting their art, and now they're being censored, and it is still just censored. Like they even have the phrase, which they usually bend over backwards to say, we don't, we're not doing censorship, these are just guidelines, or use some other word for it. But yeah, it was always kind of dumb to think that Nintendo would have been the bastion of free speech as far as censorship. If any place, it should have been Sony, but Sony is not doing it. It'd be weird if Microsoft came into the fray and said, okay, now that we see the other two people are doing censorship, let's do less censorship ourselves. Microsoft has been very consistent, and consistency really is the key here, in that they have been pro-censorship the whole time. And they have always had strict guidelines and regulations, even as they were selling themselves as the Halo Gamer Bros console where all the college kids would have gone. They really never did allow anything more than titillation on their console. I don't think BMX XXX, for instance, many decades ago, was on the Xbox consoles, and when you think of like Rumble Roses XX, that's more titillation, and the volleyball games, Dead or Alive volleyball games, that's titillation stuff. Moving on, the FTC could reportedly rule on Microsoft Activision's deal by late November. This would be the United States ruling on it compared to the UK organization ruling on it. And it definitely seems like where it rains and pours as we now move to the Gematsu articles, which we have a decent amount of them today, in that Spike Chunsoft, both now their game is not coming to Steam, and that their parent company's CEO was arrested for bribery. And here's a bending over backwards way of saying, not saying censorship, guideline required changes to the game's content. Yep. So yeah. And you almost would have thought that some of this was just pushback from specific companies trying to get more onto the storefronts and trying to push for less censorship. But nobody really goes into the forums and rants and raves. I'm probably the person that is as much anti-censorship more than anybody else online, and while there are probably people that feel the same way as far as being anti-censorship, there's not enough to complain or threaten to stop buying games on Steam for Steam to care or Valve to care. It is hypocrisy specifically on Valve's part, who have in the past at least pretended to be a libertarian run company on libertarian ideas. It is hypocrisy at that point to say, well, censorship should be allowed. And Valve in particular has been just all over the place as far as being inconsistent, and the inconsistency is more of a problem than anything. If you have a kid, being consistently unfair is better than being randomly unfair as a parent. Like, if you just know your parent is a jerk and will say no to everything you ask them, that's better than having a parent that will say yes 60% of the time but will flip out and punch you in the head the other 40% of the time. Like, that's way worse. And that's an extreme, certainly, contrast, certainly. But yeah, I'd like to see a detailed breakdown, and we probably will never really have it, as far as what is not being allowed. But it is worth pointing out that Chaos Head Noah for PC is a port of an Xbox 360 game from 2009. And then was put on the PSP in 2010, and iOS on 2010, and Android in 2012, and PlayStation 3 in 2012, and PS Vita in 2014, and Switch in 2022. So this is the most solid foundation ever of Steam holding Chaos Head Noah to a new standard that they were not held to going back as far as 2009. So really goes to show that there is an increase in censorship compared to 2009, and it's unfair, inconsistent, and ridiculous. Moving on, a game called The Legend of Ting Ding for basically everything gets a free boss rush update, which is this like a beat 'em up game? Yeah, beat 'em up game. There could be something to this. In a lot of ways, this looks a lot like the game I just played relatively recently, Shank, but with more of a Chinese Asian storyline and effect to it. Yeah, that looks interesting, but we need to move forward as fast as possible. Let's see. As far as physical and digital sales, we have this game that I'm not going to try and pronounce. Nier Automata End of Yorha Edition for Switch. No Man's Sky for PS5 and Switch. No More Heroes for PS4 and PS5. And Touch Detective for Switch. And then actually, fairly small list of games that came out digitally this week. Remember, it is also Golden Week, so that might mean less actually bothers to come out during this week in either physical or digital edition. But if I were to look at these ratios, it seems like less bothered to come out digitally and slightly more bothered to come out physically. Maybe there's a reason for that. There's a rumor, the Horizon Zero Dawn remaster for PS5. I'm not sure if it's actually been confirmed at this point. And then Horizon Online multiplayer game for PS5 and PC potentially being in development, which I don't know if I really want a multiplayer game based on the Horizon universe. As somebody who hasn't played any of the Horizon games at all, I don't know if even the fandom of Horizon games that want a multiplayer game. Generally speaking, I don't think most people want multiplayer elements to single player games they liked. We had already talked about this, but apparently Sony Interactive Entertainment plans on producing 2 million PlayStation VR 2 headsets, which is probably 4 times more than they should make, at least. Guilty Gear Strive free-to-play crossplay open beta test is set for October 14 and 17. It'll be interesting to see the numbers of people willing to play Guilty Gear Strive at this point, since there's been just major controversy already around the game that's not even out yet, in that Bridget, who seems to be a major character in every screenshot now, has major controversies around her/him, and the creator of Guilty Gear in general has left the company. So I wouldn't be surprised if Strive is the last game in the Guilty Gear series because nobody wants to play it and it just gets boycotted, or it succeeds fine but they still don't really bother to make a new Guilty Gear game, and just try to move on to a different series. Soul Hackers 2 update is going to add a dash ability, high speed battle mode, and 4 new demons in early November, which basically they're saying that's going to give you the ability to run through the game faster. And since this is one of these Atlas Shin Megami Tensei or dungeon crawler games, doing everything faster is a smart move, to say the least. I still don't think I'm at this point want to play any of those games. Like they all seem just far too grindy. Even the Persona games feel too grindy. A game called Labyrinth of Galleria, The Moon Society, launches February 14th in North America and February 17th in Europe. Which, is it just a visual novel? Or is it a JRPG? Looks like it's a turn-based JRPG. It's rated M with partial nudity. Let's see. It's really not showing a lot of gameplay here, though. I don't think there's a single bit of gameplay being shown in this, other than you're possibly exploring the labyrinth and running into random encounters, and then you'll be talking to people. Alright, so here's what the actual gameplay looks like. It's just your standard dungeon crawler type game that immediately makes me uninterested in those kinds of games. A rhythm combat adventure game called Atone, A Heart of the Elder Tree is coming to the Switch and PC in early 2023. It's an interesting question, certainly, as to whether now is the time to be announcing new games when you're almost certainly going to get forgotten around Black Friday and Christmas, or should you just wait? But then I guess since this was an Apple Arcade game that originally came out in September 2019, maybe they're planning on putting it out in January, so they need to start pushing it and advertising it now. Certainly, though, I doubt anybody expects to get like gift cards for something like Steam and then not spend those gift cards before Christmas. Yeah, I seriously doubt very few people actually get Steam credit or Steam gift cards for a Christmas gift, and then end up not spending it by New Year's. Of course, that would be certainly weird. It might work, though, to tell a kid, here's your annual budget of $300 of Steam credit. You can spend it whenever you want, but you're not getting any more money on your Steam account until next Christmas. And make them budget it out. Of course, they'd spend it all, almost certainly, in the first sale. A side-scrolling action RPG called Est Libra Revision for PC launches October 13th, which it's a side-scrolling shooter game. It's kind of a slightly different art style as far as the characters, but Looking at the actual game, that too looks different. It's fairly zoomed out. Probably because you're going to be fighting very giant enemies. Yeah, there's kind of a wideness to the faces of these characters that seems odd. And it's not just like the weird angles, because nobody is directly looking at the camera so much. They're all slightly tilted with their heads, but just generally you have kind of this wide face design, and it might even be slightly due to the shoulder lengths or even the width of hands that they're just trying to draw things slightly off of what you'd normally expect. And then you could also say that there's kind of some redundant dark color palettes around a lot of this. Not what I'd call just a terrible animation, just slightly different and maybe slightly not as good as I'm not used to seeing. Let's see, we already talked about this multiple times. Outer Worlds Spacer's Choice Edition being rated in Taiwan. Xbox Game Pass stuff we already talked about. SpongeBob SquarePants The Cosmic Shake launches in 2023, and a Best Friends Forever edition has been announced, which seems like it would have like an inflatable Squidward, and maybe this is a statue, or maybe this is not real and it's DLC. It says Costume Pack DLC right above it. And certainly if this was a real world statue, then why would you cheap out with a big inflatable character otherwise? But yeah, this particularly highlights the question as to who are these SpongeBob games really being advertised to, because I would think it would be adults now who saw SpongeBob when they were kids, and they probably aren't that obsessed with SpongeBob. I've never really seen somebody that's like a Disney adult that's just obsessed with SpongeBob that they would want a big inflatable Squidward. So I imagine very few people would ever even want, let alone get this Best Friends Forever edition. But they probably will buy the game at some point. A game called Arkanoid Eternal Battle launches October 27th. We'll leave it at that. Seems like it's coming out on basically everything. Overcooked All You Can Eat World Food Festival update launches October 12th. And that seems to be on all the consoles and PC. I guess at this point, as much as you don't want to be happy about Stadia being shut down, it does make my life a little bit easier. A lot of the Gematsu articles were pointing out that some of the games were coming to Stadia on top of being on PC. So the long list of a game coming to like the Xbox One and the Xbox Series X and S and the PlayStation 4 and the PlayStation 5 and Stadia and PC via Steam or Epic Games Store and the Nintendo Switch, like it really was sucking a lot of oxygen out of my lungs to just say that. And very often I would say basically everything, and that would include Stadia or not include Stadia. So yeah, Stadia being gone, we don't have to worry about that as much. Here is the full picture for the Mario movie, and you can see these big round hills and Princess Peach Castle. Notably, you can see some other floating places that makes it feel a lot like Mario Odyssey's design of the world. And I guess Mario Odyssey at a certain level does really imply that is probably the way they think of the Mario world now, is that there are these different realms on the same planet in Mario's universe, and these different realms can be drastically different visually, but are all still fairly connected and all of them have moons, even if sometimes the moons are stars, to collect. I wouldn't be surprised if Mario ends up going to the moon. Although, when you look at this and him just looking up at the castle like this, it does kind of imply that this might be an origin story, a rebooted origin story, in which Mario ends up in the Mushroom Kingdom, or has just always been in the Mushroom Kingdom, but has never made it to the castle, never met Princess Peach. And so this may be an origin story of befriending her and establishing a real relationship. There really isn't much of a relationship between Princess Peach and Mario. There's no confirmation of a Yoshi or a Luigi or any of those characters. Here's an even bigger version of it that might give you some more hints. You do see like a Luigi balloon potentially here. Big golden balloon from Mario Odyssey. And yeah, there are definitely elements. There's all kinds of like pipe works on the sides here. That definitely looks like the dinosaur land from Odyssey, though. So yeah, looking up like that, I do wonder if this isn't going to be an origin story. Of course, that's also just pointless speculation. Let's see, Company of Heroes 3 has been delayed to February 23rd, 2023. Check that out if you're interested. A third-person puzzle adventure game called Walian Unexpected Guest has been announced for PC, which we really don't have time to watch trailers, but we kind of have to. So I wonder if this is a platform adventure game that in part is kind of trying to be like an anti-Splatoon game, where it has kind of the paintball type physics in which you would shoot and paint things with paint, but you're not using it just to gain territory as much. Instead, you're using it as a push-pull magnetic effect on different colors of paints. This looks a little too weird for its own good, but yeah, there might be a experience here that comes out good. I'm gonna have to take a moment to drink some water. Let's see, Dead Space Remake gameplay trailer and screenshots. We had already chosen not to really look at that. I'll jump through the screenshots and see. Like, here's their concept art for 2023 version of Dead Space, the remake, and here's the original 2006 original version of it. And yeah, it looks more detailed, like, no doubt. But if you're just going to remake the same thing and make it look prettier, that's only going to get you so far. And they're being fairly consistent saying 2023 here. They should just say remake at the bottom of it. Yeah. You almost would want a Dead Space remake to not take place on the Nostromo, and just an entirely different spaceship with entirely different levels and an entirely different story. I think that's your better bet as far as remaking Dead Space than just doing what's already been done again. Let's see. Here you can see their new IP Hadar from CD Projekt Red, and a new Witcher trilogy, and Canis Majoris, which who knows what that is. Then Orion, and then Phantom Liberty is, I guess, their long-term names for things and ideas they have. But having a name, a project name, does not mean you actually have an idea or an actually good experience. Yeah. In a lot of ways, these could just be straight up lies, just trying to appease a fairly unhappy shareholders at CD Projekt Red. Because, let's face it, shareholders are not happy with the way CD Projekt Cyberpunk 2077 went. A demo for the Doraemon Story of Seasons Friends of the Great Kingdom is now available, which this is a different Doraemon game than the other Doraemon game. Because the first one was Summer with like Professor something. So Story of Seasons probably is a subtitle of having several different Doraemon games at the same time. Unless I'm thinking of a different game completely, which might be the case. Yeah, I think I actually am thinking of a completely different game, and I just haven't even heard of this one. Moving on, a 3D platformer Bati has been announced for PC. Kind of looks more like an Infinite Runner than a 3D platformer. Okay, I guess there's 3D platforming in other segments. Although most of these GIFs here, half of them do feel like transition racing type experiences. See, Toho Go Yoku Ibun, I'm not going to try to pronounce the rest of this, for Switch has been launches in October 20th, so another Toho game. Yep. Is it a side-scrolling shooter? No. It kind of looks more like it's a beat-em-up fighting type game. I'd say probably more beat-em-up than just fighting. It doesn't look particularly good in the animation department, and I know the Switch is not a very powerful console, but even by that metric, this looks really, really ugly, I have to say. Azure Striker Gunvolt 3 for PC launches October 13th, which it seems like every month there's some new Azure Striker announcement. Maybe that's just because they did a really good job of staggering when different versions of the game were released for different consoles. The demo is currently available, part of the Steam Next Fest. I didn't even bother mentioning the Steam Next Fest because those festivals around the idea of just installing a bunch of demos really just feel like a waste of time. Warhammer 40k Inquisitor Martyr Ultimate Edition for PS5 and Xbox Series launches October 27th. Dragon Ball Z Kakarot for PS5 and Xbox Series launches January 13th, 2023. Which, do we have a general idea of what it is? It's an action RPG game. Yeah. It's an action RPG game, and it may be just a remaster for next generations of the game, a game that already came out. Which I wouldn't be surprised if we do start to see some of the Japanese games, the Dragon Ball games in particular, getting remasters over and over again, because anything with Dragon Ball tends to sell fairly well, obviously. And yeah, I'm still not really willing to sit through 7 minutes of gameplay around Wild Hearts. Everything I've seen of it so far feels like it is more of a Asian fantasy inspired Monster Hunter game that also seems to have some weird element of building elements to it, like they're trying to add Fortnite to it. And I don't know if that as a concept works. Maybe it does. Maybe you get your friends together and you go hunt a giant monster and you do some slight building like Fortnite, and then that gives you a different experience compared to playing Fortnite where you're just working either team versus team to shoot people or single soloing it to shoot people. I'm not sure if actually you can even team up in Fortnite. Yeah, I'm not certain actually. It could be a battle royale only experience. Moving on, Tactics Ogre Reborn details unit development charms and a bunch of other content. Looking at the actual game, it's just kind of a small JRPG pixel game, and it really seems to have way too many systems to make me interested in it. It also seems like it's a positional placement turn-based RPG game, which totally makes me uninterested in it also. So get rid of that. Even now, though, we are starting to see fewer and fewer visual novels. Like, visual novels may be on the cusp of just falling out of favor, and we'll only get like one announcement a week or every couple days or a month. But yeah, a romance visual novel, Haru Kiss, for PS4 and Switch is coming out January 26th in Japan. Like, the thing here specifically is that you would, if PlayStation 4 games are going to start to get censored even in Japan, they'll stop making visual novels in general. Like, I don't think there's a decent chance this game doesn't need to be censored either way, but if one company complains, 5 other companies will listen in Japan, and so we could see the end of it. Notably, when you look at this art style, as far as the way they are drawn, they are trying to go almost in an anti-moe style here. They have gone out of their way to make the characters longer and taller. I assume that this might be a girl-on-girl Yuri romance, but maybe not. They still are basically having them in school outfits, though. Like, there really is no way to draw a Japanese character without putting him in a school outfit in the minds of most animators. But when you look at the special reversible image here, they're very much going out of their way to once again take up the full length of the frame and make them as tall as possible. They're making their heads potentially a little bit smaller. You've got fairly plump big breasts here, and that's probably again to just make them look older. Very long arms, very long midriffs. They've got a skirt here which is actually covering up more. Very long legs. This is rated 0D, so like the 0 rating of D is not E for everyone, but I think D might just be slightly above that. But yeah, logically still an inconsistency here. You have 2 different school outfits, which implies probably that this one is a year younger at least than this character. Let's see. This was a game that was originally released also on PC in 2015, so it's not particularly even a new game. So we may very well see that only things that have already been established are getting console ports, and then the rest of the industry is just going to dry up and they're not going to even bother to make visual novels anymore. At a certain point, it wouldn't be crazy if we start to see visual novels just go on YouTube and just have a virtual YouTuber or VTuber either read out visual novels and play them and stream and just try to get ad revenue that way, or straight up take the general narrative story and concepts of visual novels and just have VTubers act as each of those characters and try to get ad revenue that way. Now, I don't know if you were to do a site like YouTube and just have it streaming and free, being ad supported. I don't know how you have people jump from one choice to the other choice. Like, you can certainly do that. You can have links and you can have in screens to say, hey, if you choose this choice, click here. If you choose that choice, click here. But there was a system like that before on YouTube that they took down because it was getting abused way more than it was being legitimately used. And there's no guarantee that in screens wouldn't get removed or deprecated in the future. So yeah, if you were going to try to have any interactive on it. Now, if it's just a kinetic visual novel that you tried to make into a YouTube video, that works perfectly fine. Like that, because then there's no choices anyways. But then they also would almost certainly make way less money on ad revenue versus trying to sell it from their own independent websites. And I don't know if the Japanese would embrace the idea of watching a kinetic visual novel on a YouTube-like site on their cell phones. Moving on, a twin-stick shooter action RPG called Dread Hunter has been announced for PC. Which, I don't know if I've seen this announcement before or if I've just seen a lot of games that look like this, because this feels quite familiar. And then our last Gematsu article for today says Spooky's Jump Scare Mansion HD renovation is coming to the Switch on October 13th. So, a scary game. And that is going to leave us with a lot of games. And then my screen just blacked out again. I don't know why it's doing that. Frankly, I hope it's not a I hope it's not my video card somehow messing up again. I did recently install a new driver, but it just blinked right there. If anything, maybe ideally it would just be the HDMI cord. We have an adult game that I zoomed off called Slave of Lust. It's your standard Western 3D models with just hardcore pornography in the screenshots. Noticeably, it seems like you are having sex in like a college classroom, is how I describe it for most of the screenshots, and otherwise it just doesn't look like anything else or anything with it. It's $5.09. It's English and Chinese as far as the languages. So as I kind of am looking at everything black and white, I would say it definitely is a Western adult game, and we'll just see what the balances are. This Godland Fire Quest is also tagged as a visual novel, and there's a decent amount of skin on that character, but then not really that much on that character, and the animation style doesn't look amazingly great. And certainly I wonder what happens to a lot of these games as far as not having release dates and not having anything on them. I, at this point, can pretty much confirm that the way I've been doing it has been slightly wrong, because if I am seeing a game like this and it doesn't have a release date, I need to put it on the fall list, because I'm just never going to see it again. These games either never come out and yet they get a Steam page and then that Steam page gets taken down later, or forgotten about in general, or they do come out but they don't get put back on the list of new releases, and that becomes the reason why things just disappear. At a certain level, like many business potential ventures, Steam Direct, or just listing your game on Steam in general, whether you're using Steam Direct or not, really is dangerously close to being a scam, where even if you made a good product, even if you tried your very best and tried very hard, there's just so much stacked against you that the odds of success are fairly low. This Mushroom Card RPG might be something, although the brownish color palette isn't going to help it. It looks like we have a decent amount of games here. We have what looks like maybe a Chinese troll visual novel game. Let's see, Japanese only, actually. It's going to be free, but it's going to be Japanese only, and these screenshots seem to be all over the place, and it doesn't look particularly great. I do have a concern that the push towards trying to make 3D models pushes some animators to make very ugly 3D models when they probably could have done better with just flat 2D animation. And at a certain level, I do kind of worry that we may just lose flat 2D animation completely and it'll become a thing of the past. This Stickman Thug 3D looks like it's just a bunch of asset flips. Napped looks like a blurry horror game. I'm gonna say no to that. Deathverse Let It Die. I'm gonna put this on the follow list, but you can tell its reception is pretty poor. I wonder if that's because there's not enough people playing it, or if the game is just bad. I've only been able to get through the tutorial and browse the menus and everything, and it keeps a lot of inspiration of the original Let It Die game, but with some complications. That's going to be a long review. Free-to-play battle royale with some interesting twists and mechanics. If you're a Let It Die fan, stay away. So, people who, the niche audience who liked Let It Die, don't like the Deathverse Let It Die battle royale part of it. And I guess at a certain level, I don't even need to put this on the follow list, because I'm not going to play a battle royale game. I'm not going to play an online player versus player game. That's very hard to review. So yeah. And at a certain level, I have had to also resign to the fact that I am doing fairly heavy curation now as far as YouTube Shorts. If something is reviewed in a mixed way, I'm not going to make a YouTube Short around it. I'm so far ahead with YouTube Shorts that there's just not enough room to highlight something that even has like 2 or 3 negative reviews of having only 2 or 3 reviews. There's just not the same amount of time that you can give something to potentially turn it around like you can on the follow list. So something has to be very visually appealing and very successful out of the gate to get a YouTube Short going forward. And it is definitely my curation, so definitely there will be just some kinds of games that I'm not into that will just never get on the YouTube Short. Get a YouTube Short made after this. See, this is a pixely point and click game, and I'm a sucker for point and click, so I'll put this on my follow list, but I have to admit it's not visually appealing enough to get a short around it, or it's not unique visually enough. It doesn't even really have to be appealing. It just has to grab people's attention for the minute that somebody would be looking at it. And see, this is the little chibi game that looks like it might be a mobile port, but it's actually kind of visually polished well enough that I think I might give it a chance. But yeah, you can definitely see that it feels like this was designed for a touchscreen. So it probably won't stay on the fall list for very long. We still have about 40 games to look at, but we can burn through those 40 games fairly quickly. This is just a hidden object game. It doesn't look terrible for kind of being a uniquely different type of hidden object game, but it's still not really something I think I want to play. And again, I guess at this point I don't think I would bother to make a YouTube short around that. Revelia Dungeon Raiders might be something to that. At a certain level, I guess I also need to evaluate what I'm trying to do with the YouTube shorts too. Am I trying to highlight unknown games people wouldn't have heard of, or am I trying to just get YouTube video views? Because if I'm just trying to get YouTube views, I'd go with the biggest, most popular games that everybody already has heard of. But if I'm trying to actually educate and provide an actual service, I would show lesser known games people may have not heard of. And I guess at a certain level, if I want my YouTube channel to be useful in any way, it needs to provide the service and not just pander. Which is sad, because the only way to get views on YouTube, it feels like most of the time, is to pander. Here we have another Marvel game. There's several of these, and I guess this one just finally came out of early access because it's already on my fall list. So this may be the first instance ever since we started going through games in which we've actually seen a game come out of early access, which really speaks terrible to the quality of how many games have been just stuck in early access forever. This Puzzle Park looks like a good kind of Witness clone, potentially doing something slightly different or taking it to more of a non-electrical aspect. It even kind of feels like it might be a little bit inspired by the Talos principle with the Greek and Roman architecture and just the visuals. That is something that the Witness as a game didn't have the capability of dealing with. And that it couldn't make something pretty just for pretty's sake because of the way the gimmick of the Witness, without spoiling the gimmick of the Witness, worked. This game is way too dark. This is nothing. One of the things I will say about Zero Time Dilemma also is that there was 3 anagrams that really played no part in the game at all that you were shown, and you kind of were told they were anagrams, but there was really no way you'd be able to spin it out and figure out what the anagram was supposed to be, and the game just tells you what the anagrams were supposed to be. So it really was an unnecessary element that was a throwback to an anagram in the previous game, Virtue's Last Reward, and even in that case it didn't really make sense. So I had to quickly zoom away from Furry Sex Game Dev's story, which is again one of these adult games that the screenshots are immediately showing hardcore pornography in the screenshots, which that's the only censorship I would agree with, is that they need to pop up a warning before it plays every time. At a certain point, I think it is fair to say furry games deserve their own category. It's not fair to say that a game of anthropomorphic animals and furries as an adult game is a Western game or an Eastern game, although I would definitely lean towards it being more of a Western game since they always support English, and I've never seen one actually support Japanese or any Eastern language. But yeah, I would say those are the neutral options as far as adult games that should not go in either category. So I'd still say for so far we've seen one Western adult game, and that's it, and we just don't count the furry games. It is insanely weird that there are as many furry games as there are. Either they are selling much more than I think they would sell, or there's just a lot of trolls out there that are pushing that concept that they sell very well. But honestly, there's so many furry games that if this was just a Russian troll bot farm concept, and that they were just like money laundering money through furry games, even that is fairly hard to believe. Even though I do believe that probably is happening somewhere to some small extent, I doubt every single furry game is just designed as a way of money laundering and being bought by Russian assets, who are Russian people who are money laundering, or some other country that's money laundering. This game, Wands Alliances, I don't know why I zoomed away from that. It's like a VR game, player versus player. I'll give it a follow and see if maybe it's well received. Of course, I really shouldn't bother to give it a follow, because it fails immediately. Like, we just aren't anywhere close to a reality where a player versus player VR game makes sense. And even in this trailer you're seeing, they're using like PlayStation and Oculus headsets. They're not using HTC Vive headsets. So yeah, I think this trailer is almost certainly for PlayStation first and foremost. So yeah, I just think we are too far away from reality as far as it's concerned. We're too far away from a potential future reality where VR is going to be so prevalent that multiplayer games make sense. This Mana Finder game looks too much like a NES game. So I'm going to say no to that. And then Ryclaw Hope. Here looks like a cheap visual novel, possibly a Chinese visual novel. The background's pretty poorly animated, one character. It's English only, so I guess you call this a odd English visual novel or odd Western visual novel. KFZ. At a certain level, I guess those types of games probably should exist. If we started to have Western game companies and Western developers say, hey, I want to make a visual novel type game, and I want to have one of the characters or the main characters be this younger looking character in this moe art style, or just actively say I want this character to be a younger character, then there might be a level of normalization, for lack of a better term, on the idea of telling a story in which a kid plays a role, and not just immediately assuming that anything that looks like a visual novel that has a moe girl character is then a romantic interest lead, and that there's going to be something lewd or inappropriate shown in that game. Because right now at Valve, it seems like the rule is if any character is in a school swimsuit, if a kid is in a school swimsuit, it's only there to be leered at by perverts, and that's the kind of paranoia that's not going to be conducive to free speech, certainly. It's kind of what you see in politics all the time, is just call everybody a pervert, call everybody a pedophile, and just sling that mud and sling that accusation with no fear of being sued. There probably should be some more liable lawsuits around this. This game I have to kind of applaud. Here, Emmy A New Beginning, all the screenshots are, for the most part, YouTube family friendly. Now, obviously, this is one of these Western 3D model adult games. It's in the adults only section, certainly. But at the very least, they have not, like, spoiled the surprise by having just full-on nudity in the screenshots, and they've made it family friendly. It doesn't have a price, it just says coming soon. It's English only. It might be a case where there actually isn't any nudity and you just have a big-breasted character in provocative poses and provocative outfits. But then why would it be in the adult-only section at that point? Maybe there is a certain level at which that would be too much and that should be in the adult only section, but at a certain point I almost think it shouldn't be in the adult only section if it's just going to be provocative clothing and slightly skimpy clothing. I guess I probably don't have a solid rule as far as whether something should be in the adults only section if it's not showing actual nudity or not. I'd have to think about it some more and have more examples. I mean, in comparison, watching on Hulu the movie Titane, that French movie that I talked about at the beginning of the stream, yeah, there's just straight up nudity shown several times and sex shown once or twice maybe. I don't know, I got bored fairly quickly into it. This looks good enough to deserve a follow, I guess. But I don't know if I really would put Titane as a game in the NC-17 category for what it's actually showing and saying. Definitely wouldn't call it porn. This Village Rhapsody doesn't look like anything of interest. Alright, we have about 10 more games that have come out, so there was quite a big number. But we still very much are at the point where I would say at least 95% of all the games that are coming out are not worth having anything mentioned about them. And I imagine that's going to become even more of the case as we get further down towards the end of the year. Like, I really am not expecting a lot of new things. Here you have what looks like kind of an old school point and click adventure game, but I suspect it is actually a brand new game. And visually it looks different enough that I might give that a YouTube short. Here we have a Ouija game that looks awful. Hunter A Hunter looks awful. You know what really sucks today though is that we've seen 2, maybe 3 Western adult games, 1 furry game, no Eastern adult games at all. And what sucks about that, I would say even more than anything, is the number in total. Like, everything seems to be fairly limited. And honestly, I would be much happier to get to a point where half of all the adult games, all the games I'm looking at, are adult games that might actually sell a few copies, instead of seeing garbage games that honestly I don't believe will sell even 2 or 3 copies of their game. All the garbage things that nobody has passion for, either as the creators or as the consumers, nobody has passions for it. Alright, so moving on to the GameDeveloper.com articles, we have only a few of these, and most of which we can just skip because we've already talked about it. Bloober Team making the move to TV. Overwatch 2 being targeted by a DDoS. Supercell is ending development on the Everdale after it falls short of expectations. which Everdale as a game I don't recognize. Let's see, the deadline for the Microsoft proposal in the UK being set. Tencent has nabbed a minority stake in the Polish studio Grubby Entertainment. Tencent still actively trying to acquire parts of some companies. At a certain point, I almost wonder if Tencent is going to try and do almost stock swaps and just trade one company to own a different company outright. Buy 5% of 50 different pies and then combine the 5% in trades until you can own 100% of one pie. The former PC game editor-in-chief Rob Smith has passed away, which that might be. That's probably a big issue, certainly. It's definitely a big issue when anybody dies, but like the kind of older first generation of video game journalists, I think, have slightly more credibility and slightly more qualifications than the current generation of people, and so they over their career probably have affected the way video game journalism went more, although maybe in the bad directions too. Noticeably, PC Gamer these days is pretty much just an advertisement mouthpiece for the industry. Official Xbox Game Magazine and official PlayStation magazines obviously are going to just be advertisements for the industry. Let's see. And of course, we're not going to get really an indicator of how he died. He looks old enough that he could have potentially just died of a heart attack, but nowadays it's just easier to assume COVID as much as it is to assume a heart attack. And as far as obituaries, these obituaries still are pretty bad. It was shared by Jeff Keighley, who previously worked with Smith for over 2 decades at the Game Critics E3 Awards. Which, there's an interesting question whether the Giant Bomb guy, Jeff, who no longer works at Giant Bomb, the guy who was in charge of Giant Bomb before they got rid of him, he was part of the Game Critics E3 Awards, so I wonder if he's still going to be involved with that, or if they're going to kick him out as an independent person. That'll be interesting to find out when E3 happens, assuming the E3 Game Critic Awards happen. Not that the Game Critics E3 Awards were ever particularly a big thing or important or had any real credibility. Apparently Smith was the author of Rogue Leaders, The Story of LucasArts, which is a book. He also was inside the industry instead of staying outside the industry at E3 and Treyarch, which if that's the one move that shaped the video game journalist industry, that was a bad move, certainly. It's frankly, at this point, I think completely unethical to ever work in a video game company after you've been a video game journalist, because the chances or the appearance that you are saying nice things to EA or Treyarch get risen the second you start working for EA or Treyarch. That's the problem with politics too, is you have a lot of lobbyists and politicians that become lobbyists, or politicians that become board members of the companies that they had oversight committees over. Apparently he was a creative copywriter at Xsola, never heard of it, and was involved in producing the New York Game Awards in 2022. Yep, but not much of a career, and I guess as a games journalist I don't know what you're really expecting, because maybe you could get some journalism awards if you did really great journalism, but most of them don't. ever in 30, 40 years of career. In fairness, if I was to look at like all the content that I put on YouTube, it's a lot of content. Certainly I can say I made over 10,000 videos or something like that, and throw out a big number. I could say I've probably done closer to 20,000 to 50,000 hours of content, none of which arguably is good enough for any real acclaim. I could point to maybe some of my best coverage that I think I did, but I don't even know what that would be. Like, I would lean to say go watch my Portal playthrough, but for all I know, my Portal playthrough, the first time I played it or the second time I played through it, I very possibly had nothing that amazing to say either. And that is inherently the problem with any job, is that as day to day you're just doing that job to try and make a paycheck and feed your families and go home and pay a mortgage. You usually don't have enough time to put in the extra effort to either update your resume and show the work you've been doing, or you don't have the time to actually do anything great or amazing. So that becomes, you become easily forgotten for all the things you actually did do on a day-to-day basis, because even you don't remember it. It's just always to the next project and to the next thing. Moving on, Sony launching the loyalty program we already talked about. A Dune Game Boy Advance game has been released on PC 20 years after being cancelled. Dune Orthanopter Assault for GBA was cancelled in 2002, but following a Kickstarter campaign, the game has been revived under a new name. I guess this whole Kickstarter happened and they actually made the game. As for what the actual game potentially is going to be, probably doesn't look particularly good looking at the screenshot, or play particularly well. You frankly could have just made a brand new game that looked twice as good as this and called it the same name, and I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of this code is brand new code. And if anything, I guess that just probably highlights the passion around the Dune series that this game would make. I'm almost certain that this screenshot is from the most recent Dune movie, so it's deceptive in that case. Alright, and then we've got some fall list stuff here. A Vintage Records from Hell. I don't remember this game, but it looks funny. Unfortunately, it needs more time. And then Bensimus Air Combat. 83% positive, early access. I'll give it more time. If it comes out of early access, that might work. Village Guardians VR. I think we could probably remove this as an early access VR game. Is this supposed to be player versus player? No, it's supposed to be just single player. Yeah, I'll give it more time. Am I gonna give everything more time today? No, thank goodness. Viking Vengeance is mixed, so we can leave the follow list. Video Horror Society is mixed, which is a shame because I had a small hope that this game might be good, or I'm thinking of a different game. I might be thinking of a different game. This is also an online PvP game, so it really shouldn't have been on the fall list in the first place. Let's see. This is a very old looking game. Does this even support English? It says it does. This was originally conceived for the Amstrad CPC, but I would have to say there's probably no relevance here. So yeah, this can go. And we're going through the V's, but we still seem to have a decent amount of V named games, more than you would think you would have. This VR Tetris game. only has 20 reviews that are 100% positive. So I'm definitely making an exception to have a VR Tetris game. So yeah, I'll keep that on the fall list just because I'm making an exception. Vesper Zero Light Edition is mostly positive, so that can go to the wish list. One thing makes it to the wish list. Although really, as we're approaching yet another sale, me maintaining the wish list is becoming much more of a wish list aspect than an actual shopping list aspect. I am spending less and less money in the past couple of years buying games, just not needing them. I already had games, and I'm just spending more money on non-fun things instead. This Vespa's test I'll leave and give a little bit more time to, although I'm probably saying no to it. Vertigo Remastered looks like a VR game. Honestly, if I'd seen this VR game before, I would have removed the other VR game, because this actually looks fairly decent. But again, can't really put it on the wish list because it's a VR only title. It would be fairly unfair, but I wouldn't hate it if Valve said all your VR games need to have non-VR versions of what they are. And see, here's a VR like painting experience, which is not a terrible thought by any means. Although paying $500 just so you don't have to buy paint in Canvas, so you can paint in VR, and even at that, that might save you money in the long run if you're painting a painting every week and you're having to buy new canvases and new paints and you're having to deal with the mess and the cleanup. Doing it in VR would be way better. Alright. Let's get a Duel Live going here, and then I will scroll down my Twitter feed and let's see. Marvel Snap is coming out October 18th, and I'm just keeping that page open. And the stolen content game Plan B Goddess Cards that stole art from Destiny Child is still on Steam. Its release date was September 16th, so we are approaching 11 days from now, a full 30 days being allowed on Steam after being flagged, and almost certainly the flag being ignored for having stolen content. As far as stories that have happened, Brazil's regulatory body has become the first to approve the Microsoft proposed acquisition of Activision Blizzard. I don't know why half of these countries are involved. And then Video Game Chronicles said that, and then immediately had to put out a correction saying among the first because Saudi Arabia appeared to approve the deal earlier. So they don't even know what they reported on themselves. Yeah. Which I know Saudi Arabia specifically said they have no objection to it, and I guess that is the same as saying they've approved it. So yeah, that's more evidence, I would say, that you're going to get approvals, that they are convincing the politicians or bribing the politicians or whatever to approve these deals. Tequila Works game Guilt, GYLT, is going to be a multi-platform game now that Stadia has been shut down. It was going to be a Stadia exclusive. I imagine we'll get several stories like that where Stadia exclusive games get moved over. We'll talk about that more on Friday. honestly, I don't believe that there will be that many Stadia exclusives even that do move over, because I don't think there were that many Stadia exclusives in the first place. OBS is pointing out that TwitchCon San Diego 2022 is going to happen, but they don't have a booth this year, so be looking for people wearing OBS shorts. Is all they really have to say. Which that's an odd thing to put on public notice, is that, oh, by the way, we don't have a booth there, but people may be wearing our t-shirts, so buy our t-shirts, I guess. Or they're not really implying that the people wearing the OBS t-shirts are actually employees or working on the open broadcast software software. There is a rant I certainly could go into around how open a lot of software is in the first place. The Linux kernel mailing list is probably the prime example in the past of the kind of gatekeeping that can happen and the kind of frustration you can run into, certainly. And like GitHub certainly can be very frustrating. Just because the software is open in the sense that they put it on GitHub and said it's open source doesn't mean that you can actually make a fork of the software and try and merge your branch back into the main code and get it approved. There's a lot of jerks, for lack of a more subtle term, that gatekeep and only allow certain code, potentially only allowing certain code from certain people on there to actually support the main branch of the code. And that's why you'll see a lot more forks of software than you might imagine, where people just make a fork of the code and make their own version because the original maintainer either disappeared or refuses to approve a merge or pull request. And even if you are not dealing with a jerk, there's often just a lot of extra requirement and an extra work that is asked of somebody just trying to change like one line of code into having to write 5 sentences just to justify what you're doing to fix a misspelling or something. Like, particularly in that instance, if you're changing the word cat to dog because it should be dog, and then you have to write re-spelling, just re:\spelling, you've typed more in the justification for the pull request than you've typed in actually changing the merge request, pull request, whatever it is called. I don't even know the terms on GitHub. I really wish I had been taught GitHub, but I don't even think GitHub existed when I was in school. But yeah, that version management as a concept wasn't even a thing. Like, they didn't even bother saying, hey, make different save files. So very often I was totally taught to just save the file over the same file on the floppy disk because there wouldn't have been enough room otherwise on a floppy disk. Speaking of floppy disks, at one point I had a floppy disk laptop and I do not remember what I did with it. I definitely had a lot of computer stuff that I think I just threw away. Like, and that's kind of a sad statement that you've been dealing with computer technology so long that you can have an entire laptop and an entire pile of old computer technology that I either gave it away or threw it away. But also it was basically a first generation laptop, so it had maybe Windows 95 on it and that's it. Anyways, we've gone 3 hours and 24 minutes, and yeah, I'm afraid we may be getting back to longer streams at this point. As I intentionally never read Sniper Ranger's last comment, which was at 2:49 my time, and it is now, I think, close to is that right? 5:45? Like, Sniper Rangers put BRB as in be right back, and like, you don't have to put that in the comments, certainly, because it's not really something that I would read out loud anyways, but it would be funny if he came back right now. But he very possibly did come back a long time ago and just stopped commenting. Anyways, I figured that'd be a funny way to end this stream. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and watch every second of my videos. If you want to friend or follow me on any social media sites, there's a whole bunch of links down below. And if you want to support me further, there's a link to Patreon, or you can friend me on Steam and give me a game off my wishlist. Thank you for watching. Have a good evening.